Evening, everyone.
Good evening, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. I just want to quickly check, Lemise, can I just ask you quickly if I should maybe wait a few more minutes for others to join? Lemise, can you hear me? Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Perfect. Okay, we'll give it 5 more minutes and we'll kick off at 6:05. Thanks. Okay, so I think we can get going. I'm just a bit conscious that we have quite a lot of information to get through this afternoon, this evening, actually. So once again, a very warm welcome to everyone. I trust that you're all well and you've made it through this week. It's felt like a very long week. Um, Yeah, and tonight we will be covering two topics. The first topic is on recruitment and selection. So it'll still, just a reminder, we are still on knowledge module one, and we'll be looking at topic three, which is recruitment and selection. And the other topic that we'll be covering is performance management. Okay, so before I continue, I just want to quickly go over the format for the rest of the Office Supervisor program. Okay, so we will be changing the format a bit in terms of how our rollout is going to be. So we will no longer be having these live webinars. Okay, so where everybody joins in and I will be presenting my slideshows. So we will not be doing that. We will have a pre-recorded a session in terms of the actual content. And what will happen thereafter is we will still meet on the days that are allocated for the webinars. However, it'll just be to go over almost a summary of the topic that you would have gone through. So the idea is that you would have the pre-recording, so the recording as well as me going through the slideshow a week before our next session, or sometimes you could have it even before that as we get into the actual program. And you would need to go over that recording. You would need to go through the slide deck as well as go through that specific topic that we will be covering in terms of the Q&A. So the idea is you need to come through to that Q&A session. It needs to be a bit more of an interactive session where if you have any questions relating to the topic, if you need any clarity, then we can go through it at that point. I just want to see here. Just give me one moment. I think everybody does have sight of the new rollout plan, where we've taken obviously all the topics, etc., and we've now just reallocated them so that wherever in the past plan it was more of a few topics, and then we'd go into our practicals. So after our knowledge module one, we would go straight into all the practicals for that specific knowledge module. So not knowledge modules, you would have your formative assessments, which I will go through with you at our Q&A session. So I'll take you through your formative assessment guide, and the formative assessment will be based on all the topics that we've actually covered thus far. Just trying to think what else I need to just highlight here. I haven't forgotten anything. The other thing I want to also mention is that you will not have separate days for your summative assessments. Your summative assessments will be conducted on the same day of our practical session. So the idea is that you will write your summative assessment in the morning, and then we will continue with our practical session thereafter. Okay, so again, all of that is on your revised rollout plan that has been issued out. Are there any questions just regarding the way forward with the Office Supervisor program? Any questions? Does anyone need any clarity? Okay. I've lost my screen. Sorry, just give me one moment while I get back into my screen. Okay, and just another reminder, if you haven't already done so, please may you complete the attendance register by completing your full name and surname in the chat bar. Okay, so let's get going with today's topic. So I have prepared two slide decks for tonight. So it's two separate slide decks. The first slide deck will be on recruitment and selection. And when we are done with the slide deck, perhaps then we can have a 5-10 minute comfort break, and then we can continue the session with the next topic, okay, which is our performance management topic. Okay, again, just in terms of a reminder with our disclaimer, please remember that all learning material that is available on your Moodle platform may slightly deviate in terms of the content that is on the presentation today. Always ensure that your first point of resources and learning is on your Moodle platform. So that's your learner guide, any podcasts, any sort of materials pertaining to that topic. That should be your first point. Okay. In terms of our recruitment and selection, so the topics that we will be going through specific to this to recruitment and selection. So plan, prepare, and provide necessary support during recruitment, selection, and disciplinary purposes. Support recruitment and selection processes correctly. Identify and explain steps of recruitment and selection. And identify documents that is critical in recruitment and selection process. Okay, so that's just again the topics that, or the points of the topics that we'll be covering tonight. Sorry, I just realized that I'm not going to be able to see. Okay, there we go. Okay, so let's look at the office manager's role in recruitment and selection. Okay, so we are going through this program, which is an office supervisor program. And the idea is that with being an office supervisor or an office manager, you would need to possess various skills, um, various types of knowledge pertaining to perhaps legislation, specific things dealing with employees and how we hire employees, how we discipline, how we performance manage them. So you find that this entire program will be around equipping you with the knowledge and skills on how to perform your duties as an office manager. So in our recruitment and selection process, your role as an office manager, office supervisor, you would need to be involved in recruitment and selection, and this is a very hands-on procedure. Okay, so we know that even though there's a human resources department, some bigger organizations have a specific recruitment department, but ultimately you as an office manager, if you are recruiting within your department, you would need to understand how that process would work. Okay, so we know that recruitment impacts our company culture, our team performance, and compliance. And it starts from the time we are screening people, when we're putting out that advert, all of that, we are already identifying the type of individual we need in our organization because we need that person to adapt to our company culture, share the same belief that our organization has in terms of our vision and mission. And ultimately, they need to be part of a team that's high performing, right? And also ensuring that they maintain the standards as set out by the organization and also compliance. Okay, so office managers act as the bridge between the human resource departments and candidates. Okay, and very important is there are a set of specific legislation that would need to be abided by. Okay, so company we would need to ensure that there's compliancy. Okay, And your first step would be to understand the legal context. So in terms of the Employment Equity Act, okay, that ensures that there's fair practice in our organized in our hiring practices. Okay, our Labor Relations Act tells us how are employees protected. Okay, so that is the legislation that basically protects employees' rights in terms of any discipline, fair process, how they should be dealt with if there is any form of misconduct, etc. And then we also have the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, okay, and that is now around working conditions and ensuring that companies hire employees on a fair um, process when it comes to their working conditions. Okay, so what are your responsibilities as an office manager? Okay, so you would need to ensure that you are aligning your job descriptions um, with the actual duties, job duties, okay, making sure that whatever you're advertising actually reflects the roles, day-to-day requirements, okay? So you need to understand the legal frameworks, need to understand the organization policies, assisting in creating accurate current job descriptions, ensuring that these advertisements are inclusive and accessible, okay? And also ensuring that you are coordinating across various teams. And that will ensure that, there's fewer delays and you are giving that candidate a very good experience. Okay, so that's just a high level on your role as an office manager in recruitment and selection. Okay, any questions before we move on to the next slide? Thank you. Okay, so let's move on to supporting recruitment. So what we're going to go through now is we're going to break it down step by step. So you're going to see how this all comes together. It's sometimes, in organizations or if you speak to people, they think that, hiring somebody is just, okay, we need to look for a specific individual. Okay, they have that experience, let's just hire them and we can take it from there. But it's not as simple as that. There has to be a step-by-step process because, again, in an organization, as we mentioned, or we've seen earlier, there's legislation we need to abide by. Organizations need to ensure that they are following best practice. And when I say best practice, so like HR best practices, there are policies, procedures in place so that there is consistency within the organization. So this slide, as I said, gives us a step-by-step breakdown on how to support the process. Okay, so for example, when we look at job descriptions and specifications, you just don't write down tasks. Okay, you need to be able to liaise with line management, um, and that's to ensure that the specs reflect the skills needed. Okay, so again, job descriptions and specifications, you're aligning you are collaborating with line managers and human resources, reflecting the actual job roles, required skills from that person, and then also ensuring that there's alignment with strategic goals and legal requirements. Okay, so again, we said employment equity, basic conditions of employment, and also the Labor Relations Act. So when we look at advertising and the application process, right? So we've now placed our adverts. Then now we need to ensure that we are tracking those responses. Okay. So we would have placed those adverts, job boards. So think of Indeed, PNet, LinkedIn, all of those, or even your company website. Right, all of those platforms would be where we would place our job adverts. And then in terms of tracking it, we would need to be able to track responses, have a prepared sort of set of list, um, because we need to be able to shortlist people. That would be the next step. Okay, so in terms of shortlisting, we would need to be able to have some sort of scoring rubric or a matrix of something that we are using so that it's a fair shortlisting process. So you can see every process would need to be fair and also be applied consistently. Okay, and this will eliminate things like unbiased or biased filtering of CVs, or and it's just to make sure again that when we are following each step, we are looking at what exactly we need in terms of the skills, qualifications, all of that. If we are hiring based on our employment equity goals, all of that, we need to ensure that it's consistently fair and we're removing all biasness from that process. Okay. The next step is interview coordination. So this is actually your role in this would be a very pivotal role, right? Because, from whether it's booking the venues, providing interview packs, you are basically the person that's holding this entire process together. Okay. So it could be whether it's a face-to-face interview, virtual interview, sending out calendar invites, preparing a pack, if we are doing a panel interview, and ensuring that CVs are printed. If there's competency questions, scoring forms, all of that is ready and available for that point when it comes to the interview. In terms of your candidate evaluation and references, you also help ensure that evaluations are collected, right? And that the human resources or the HR department, they can now follow through when it comes to the reference checks, criminal checks, whatever checks need to be conducted from the company's perspective. And again, this level of support helps, hire the right candidate. And again, it means that you are involved in the process, also ultimately reducing high levels of workload on various other departments, like for example in the HR department. Okay, so it's about collaborating and not just removing yourself from that process. You want to be involved, especially if you are hiring in your department. Okay, are there any questions on the slide? Okay, let's move on to onboarding and continuous improvement. So now this is post-selection support. Okay, so you have your job offer process, right? That's now assisting with preparing the offer letters, compiling all the necessary documentation that you're going to need, contracts, tax information, ID copies, whatever it may be. That is now part of the post-selection support. Okay. And then in terms of onboarding preparation, that could be setting up the workspace, the actual place where the individual will be. So that's your desk, chair, laptop. Okay, coordinating IT access, so ensuring that the person has their email address up and running. If they have specific software that's needed on their computers, you are coordinating all of that. They get onto the necessary networks that's needed. Prepare a welcome pack and an office guide. Okay, so just sort of it's a good gesture. It makes people feel very welcome when there's a welcome pack, there's a guide for them, so they're not just sitting around not sure where to go, where's the bathroom, where's the cafeteria, are they allowed to park in certain spaces. So it's just a nice way of onboarding them so that there's clarity, and it puts them at ease as well. Team integration, this is very important. Okay, so scheduling introduction meetings, you want people to get to know the team. Okay, the team is mostly not part of this the interview process and stuff. It's always at the point of the onboarding process when the greater team will meet the individual. Okay, so you want to schedule those introduction meetings, tour the office, explain protocols, parking, clock-in times, break times, etc. And then feedback and process review. Sorry. So you want to also collect feedback from the panel and the candidate. Okay. So this is now, about the experience. If there's any process gap in terms of delays or unclear roles, you want to ensure that you understand what that is. And this helps in the next round of interview. Okay, so now you're recommending improvements. So it's always good to get feedback from candidates and from your panel that's interviewed the individual to find out how we can do better. Okay, so again, it's about constantly reviewing our processes because we want to ensure that it's streamlined, it's better. It's all about the person's experience. So it's always good to have the post-selection support and again the feedback and process review. Sorry, was there any questions on onboarding and continuous improvement? No. Okay. Okay, let's move on to the importance of recruitment and selection. Okay, so this slide will take us through why recruitment and selection is critical in an organization. Okay, so recruitment is the process used by companies to source, attract, and identify candidates for vacant positions. Okay, again, it is one of the most critical people processes within any organization. So think about your organization. If we hire the right people, we reduce the cost of poor performance, absenteeism, resignations. Okay. And it's also important that we protect our organization or the company by ensuring that we follow all the necessary legal frameworks that we have in South Africa. South Africa has one of the most intense and streamlined legislation when it comes to protecting our employees, and rightfully so, right? It's there to ensure that there is fairness in terms of how we hire people, how we treat people in the workplace. Okay, so when we look at the particular legislation, we're looking at Employment Equity Act. That's ensuring that, there's prohibition of unfair discrimination and hiring. Okay, and also ensuring that we're removing there's no discriminatory when it comes to advertising and appointing people. Okay, we have the Labor Relations Act, again, ensuring fair process during hiring and dismissals. Okay, Basic Conditions of Employment, again, outlining minimum employment standards. B Act supports equitable access for historically disadvantaged groups, as well as the POPI Act. Okay, so that reminds us to ensure that we are treating all candidate data as confidential. Okay, again, this is now adding another sort of layer in terms of care on how we store, share, discuss applications. Okay, so again, let's go back in terms of the importance. Okay, we ensuring that we are attracting the best talent. Okay, good process brings in top candidates, reducing high turnover. We have a right fit hiring. Okay, and that increases retention and reduces absenteeism. Okay, you find that there's a lot people you find when you do almost a trend analysis when it comes to behaviors in employees. If you find that there's a high level of absenteeism, chances are it could be that you haven't hired the right person for that role. And again, it's, bringing on unnecessary illness, or, they psychologically not prepared for the day of work because they are almost consumed by that role. So again, it's about ensuring that if we're following the process correctly, we know what the type of candidate we are looking for, increases their retention, and then reduces absenteeism. And then in terms of having vacant roles, it equals lost productivity. Okay, so think about the fact that you have roles that are vacant for long periods of time, it means that you have that you're losing productivity. You could have that individual in ensuring that the work continues, streamlined in terms of processes that ensures that we speed up hiring. And then supports equity, again, structured, bias-free process ensures fairness and equal opportunity. Okay, so that is us talking about the importance of recruitment and selection in an organization. So let's look at now the recruitment and advertising process. Okay, so there are a few steps that we'd have to follow before we just go ahead and advertise a role. Okay, so before we advertise, we need to ensure that there is an internal job approval process. Okay, so we've identified a need. There's a business case that's been built. Okay, there's um, a budget that has been assessed, and there's a secure management sign off. Okay, so this is again another layer of ensuring that the process is fair. Okay, and this will also ensure that we're hiring for valid business reasons, right? And within our allocated budget. Once we've got that internal improvement, okay, we need to then design an advert, okay? The advert should be informative, it needs to be inclusive, it needs to be targeted, right, to the correct audience. So we need to ensure that we have the job title, the duties of that role, where that role will be based on the location, the requirements, salary range, application method, and deadline. And this will also be, we can have the various platforms. It could be on our organization's company website, the various social media platforms that we have, job boards. So again, I mentioned earlier, job boards like Indeed or PNet or LinkedIn, Careers 24, whatever it may be, those are the job boards that we could potentially use. And it also could be emails, referrals, or even bulletin boards. So that's just around not advertising the role. Okay. In terms of the um, job advert, we need to also make sure that we are aligning it to our employment equity plan. We also need to ensure that it's compliant, so we're not just putting out an advert for the sake of it. Okay, all of this in terms of the internal approval process will look at, again, identifying the need, but also ticking those checkboxes when it comes to compliancy around that specific role. Okay, and then application collection. So we track and file CVs systematically for easy screening and compliance. Okay, and always remember, in terms of job ads, what would be considered a good job ad is it's clear and it's concise. Okay, so if it's clear and concise, it's a well-written advert. Okay, it's making sure that you know we leave a good first impression. Again, non-discriminatory, going back to speaking about compliancy, like with Employment Equity Act, and then reflect the actual job needs. Okay, people need to know exactly what the job is about, and then also ensuring that you are including how to apply. Okay, so that's going through the steps in advertising the process. Okay, now we will look at screening and interviewing. But before I go to that, are there any questions on this slide? Oh, sorry. Okay, so let's move on to screening and interviewing of candidates, not clients, sorry. So in terms of screening is about quality control, right? That's making sure that we not missing any sort of red flags, right? Or skipping over potential great talent. Okay, we need to always be cautious when it comes to CVs because it's actually almost a proven fact that majority of CVs contain false information. So when it comes to screening, we need to look out. We need to look out for employment gaps, okay? Which may necessarily not mean that it's a red flag, but it's something to question about, okay? Job hopping. So again, for somebody that's been, quite experienced, you will actually be able to see a trend in CVs. If you look at in terms of hopping, etc., as well as missing information. In terms of reference checks, okay, often a part of the process that doesn't get done. Um, it's something that if you found for two references, that's fine. But it's also important to understand that you are getting good quality reference checks. Okay, by that you want to ensure that you're confirming dates of employment, what sort of role, responsibility, duties that the person held at that organization, behavior, ethics, all of that should be asked or information gained on that. So again, you want to keep it at a very high level. You don't want to go into too much detail. A lot of companies actually have a set of questions when it comes to doing reference checks that they follow, again, to ensure that there's consistency in their screening process. Okay. Also important that, there's the qualification verification. So there's qualification, making sure that the qualification is actually legitimate. Okay, so you find that a lot of people could actually lie about achieving or obtaining certain qualifications. It is up to the person that's doing the screening to make sure that they verify that information. Okay, ensure that there's honesty and it's matched to the job requirements. We must also be very careful that we're not digging into too much information. Okay, so if you are conducting a screening on social media review, you assess the cultural fit and professionalism, and then ensure compliance with the POPI Act. Okay, so we need to follow the guidelines when it comes to the POPI Act. Again, we need to get the candidate's consent for that, and we must be able to ensure that the information that we have, we are using it responsibly and for the purpose that we need it. When it comes to interviewing, it has to be structured. Okay, it needs to be structured because, again, you don't want it to be informal. You want to be able to get as much out of that interview so that you know whether this person is fit for the role. Okay, so having an unstructured interview, this could leave room for bias. Okay, so if you are having a set of questions, you ensure that you are going through that format, and you're scoring people, you are making objective decisions. So it's not just, okay, the person comes in, it looks like they know, or it seems like they know what they're talking about, we're going to hire them. No, it should be structured, have a set of questions. You also want to look out for skills and knowledge, okay, and motivation and cultural fit. You also want to ensure that the person's has the ability to adapt to um, your organization's culture, right? So when people come into your organization in that almost cooling off period, they are still trying to learn the culture of the business. And sometimes that may not be for everybody. So at your interview, you want to almost explore that, share certain, values that your organization uphold and see whether that's something that the person would be interested in. Um, and obviously ensuring the experience relevance is matches. the role in which the person's interviewing. Okay, and again, avoiding bias through diverse panels and scoring tools. Okay, so a lot of the times you have panel interviews because it's more than likely you're not going to have every single person on that panel that will be biased. Okay, you would almost hope for the fact that you're having a panel interview so that there could be almost various views and share experiences pertaining to that interview. Okay, so that's screening and interviewing candidates. Any questions before we move on? Okay, let's look um, at the next slide where we are talking about almost your first interaction when it comes to meeting the person, the interview. Okay, so this step kind of sets the tone for what the entire interview would potentially be like. Okay, you know, you think about when we look at a warm welcome. Okay, so when you stand up, it shows respect. Okay, it also shows professionalism. You greet the candidate by name. Um, you offer a smile. You offer a handshake, and you know this is almost a way of the openness to the person, welcoming them into your organization, and you know for that person, they immediately will say, okay, this is a good experience. Um, or it could be the opposite. You could be sitting down, not making eye contact, um, almost, you know, not engaging with the person at all, don't know what their name is, and that kind of leaves a poor experience. Okay. And then panel introductions. Okay. So if you are leading the interview, you want to introduce your panel members and their roles. Okay. So for example, if you have specific people from different departments or roles. So, as an example, you can say, this is Mr. Joe Soap, and he's our HR manager. He'll be focusing on our company's culture fit, right? And then you, as the office supervisor, you are going to say, I'm the office manager supervisor, and I'll guide us through the process. So that kind of leaves a clear understanding of what the roles are, or the people's purpose in that panel. Okay, you want to share a summary, a short summary of the company. Okay, so again, this is a brief overview of the organization, the role. So in that, you want to focus on things like the mission of the company, what are the team dynamics, why the vacancy may have arose. Could be that it's somebody being promoted, or we had somebody resign recently, or because of the massive growth we are experiencing, there's now a new business need for this position. Okay, and you also want to get an understanding if the candidate has has an understanding of their role. Okay, and you almost want to confirm their expectations. Okay, you will also want to go through the structure and the timings. So you want to explain how the format of the interview is going to go ahead or run. Okay, you want to mention if there are standardized questions, um, or if there's any, sort of if it's specific to you know something based on that role, or you just you could say we are just trying to get an understanding of your role and your experience over these past years in this career. So you're almost setting the tone for exactly how it's going to be positioned. You don't want to just catch the person off guard or feel like you are almost putting unnecessary pressure on them. You want to be able to let it be a free flow of information. Okay. You also want to let the person know that you are going to be taking notes. So again, professional setup, ensure that there's water, note-taking tools. It's a quiet and a clean space. If you are using an interview guide, okay, you want to let them know that you're using an interview guide. You could have an actual physical document, or most of the time people will be on their laptops and they, typing in whatever sort of format that you're using. You want to share that with the candidates. You want them to see that there's complete transparency on the process. And again, it's going back to ensuring that we allow for a fair process during the recruitment phase. Okay, that's our interview introductions and the setup. Any questions on this slide? Oh, everyone's good. Okay, so let's go on now to interview questions and effective techniques. Okay, so the goal of this next phase is you want to ensure that the information or the interview questions are relevant to the job. Okay, so you want to ensure that you are starting off the process where you are letting the candidate narrate their professional story. So you're asking them to walk you through their CV, okay, in their own words. And that when you do that, that almost allows them to, speak freely on their experience. And also it gives you an understanding to view how their journey has been thus far. And also, you can see that it'll show you a bit, or highlights a bit of the communication skills to you. Okay. Clarify any gaps. So, again, probing employment gaps or inconsistencies respectfully. Okay. You're not going to go in because you've identified sort of a red flag for yourself that, okay, now I'm going to focus on that. You're not going to do that. However, you're going to respectfully understand, for example, I noticed that there's a gap between 2022 and 2023. Can you tell me more about that period? So you asking, but again, you're doing it politely. You're not just saying why is there a gap in your CV from 2022 to 2023? Okay. So again, through every sort of engagement on any points, whether it's a red flag to you or not, rather approach it respectfully. Education and credentials, confirm qualifications and any professional memberships. Okay. So you want to confirm if there's any sort of professional memberships, or and you're confirming their qualifications because again you know that that job role requires a specific qualification, and in some roles professional membership is required. So you want to make sure that you're understanding and getting idea whether that person ticks those boxes as well. So you trying to find out and you confirming if the qualification is there, if there's professional membership, it is there as well. Okay. Motivation for career moves. Okay, so you want to understand, or you ask the candidate why they would have left previous positions. Okay, so again, you're doing that because you're also trying to find out if there's any sort of patterns, right? Any sort of impulsive moves, or it could be signs of growth. Okay, so again, it's about looking at it from both sides. Competency-based questions, okay? You're asking for real examples, and this will demonstrate their behaviors. Okay, so competency-based questions are really good in bringing out behaviors as well. Okay, so for as an example, you could so tell me about a time that you handled a high pressure deadline. Okay, what was the outcome? So you pose a question like that, and it'll give you an idea of how the person handles themselves under a high pressure situation. In terms of technical questions, you want to explore their knowledge of any tools or systems or methods. And that could be, as an example, how would they handle, um, if, for example, how would they manage a document version control, right? So and they would give you a response to that. It could be something that they have no idea on, or it could be something that they actually do have experience on. So technical questions are based on the actual ability to perform certain tasks. And again, to highlight competency questions that we are looking for demonstration of certain sort of behaviors um, pertaining to how they would deal again with a high pressure situation or even a conflict situation. And then lastly, consistency. Okay, use a structured interview format to ensure fairness and again reduce bias. So you'll see that the common theme here in this topic with regards to recruitment is that we want to ensure that we are reducing biasness. Okay, so by maintaining this sort of consistent approach in this process, um, structure is really important. It's critical if you think about it, because that ensures that there is compliance, there's fairness. Okay, we want to also avoid asking personal questions or leading the candidate on. Okay, in the sense that you don't want to dig into too much about their personal lives at this point. Okay, you you almost want them to um, explain who they are, both from a professional point of view and also who they are from slightly a personal point of view when they are walking you through their CV. You would get an understanding from that when you give them an opportunity to tell me more about who is Marilyn, as an example, okay? And then they would almost guide you through that. So you don't want to be in a position where you're probing too much on personal questions, or you could be, when we talk about leading the person on, you could be leading them on to believe that they have the job. Okay, so this has happened. I know a few instances where people have experienced that, where they felt that in at the interview they felt like they were led on to believe that they got the job. But if you have a structured um, scoring sheet or structured interview questions, it would you don't really have the ability to lead a person on in that sense. Okay, and then you're also not probing into too many personal questions. It's again structured, sticking to the questions, gaining responses, and then following the next steps. Okay, so that's interview questions and effective techniques. Are there any questions? Can I just get a quick hands up to make sure that I haven't lost? Okay, there we go. Thank you, Louise. Okay, so let's move on now to closing the interview and candidate assessments. Okay, so this is now the wrap up and evaluation, your next steps and fair assessments. Okay, so as the interview now comes to an end, you need to clearly communicate what the next steps are. Okay, for example, you are going to state, what's going to happen next. So you'll hear back from us by Monday or Tuesday, and this will be via email or it could be by telephone. If you're saying it's going to be via telephone, and let them know who they can expect to be calling them. This sort of gives the candidate a bit of closure and, reduces that unnecessary need for them to constantly follow up because no one's gotten back to them about about what's going to happen next. And also remember, though, if you are advising the candidate that somebody will be calling them on Monday or latest Tuesday, you must bear in mind that that candidate is patiently waiting for Monday or Tuesday. So if you're going to give a timeline, ensure that those timelines are met. Okay. You want to ask if they have any final questions, right? And this can give insight into, what matters to them. Okay. So sometimes, you would get really great questions from candidates, and this will show genuine interest in that role or the organization. Okay. So always invite final questions from the candidate. So it just shows that they have a say also, and also if they have any concerns, they can also provide that information to you at that point. Thank you and departure. Always thank the candidate sincerely. Okay. Escorting them to the exit courteously. That's almost like a very small gesture, but it's a very powerful one. Okay. It also demonstrates professionalism and it leaves a very good impression on that person. So it's a good final impression. When we spoke earlier, we spoke about a good first impression. The final impression is now when you are saying goodbye to them. Assessment types. Okay, so if you have assessments that fall part of the process of your selection process, okay, you want to ensure that you're briefly explaining what they are, and what the purpose is for those assessments. Okay, so for example, you have skills tests, that's Excel or writing. You can say we use these short computer tests, and we have personality tests. All of you explaining why we have them. Okay, so again, we want to make sure that there's computer literacy, personality profiles to better understand what sort of work preferences you have as an individual. There are also cognitive tests. That's now to look at people's reasoning, problem solving abilities based on scenarios and digital role plays, etc. And there's also integrity and emotional intelligence. You want to be clear on if there's any sort of psychometric tools, okay, that's going to be used, because again, we need to ensure that it meets legal compliancy for, again, in terms of our Employment Equity Act, it needs to be administered by registered professionals that are, with HPCSA, so that's, Health Professionals Council of South Africa. So that ensures that it is fair and it's reliable, and it also protects company from a legal perspective. So always make sure if there are any psychometric testing, these are done only by registered practitioners. Okay, that is now the closing the interview and our candidate assessments. Any questions on this slide? Okay, so let's look at risk assessments, okay, background and qualification checks. So the reason why we have this is to mitigate any hiring risks, and we do that by conducting background and qualification checks, okay? So the reason why we do that is because in the hiring environment, okay, there is a high level of risk. Okay, so risk management is needed. Um, and, a candidate may look extremely good on paper, um, and may even perform really well when it comes to the interviews, but sometimes we don't really see, immediate issues that could actually pose a risk to the company's operations or even the reputation of the company. Okay, so why does risk assessments matter? It protects the organization from legal, financial, and reputational harm. Okay, and it also confirms credibility and trustworthiness of candidates. Okay, we should always ensure that there is a risk assessment that forms part of our recruitment process. Okay, it should be a non-negotiable, and you'll find that this risk assessment will always again, protect the organization, from any sort of legal issues, again, financial issues, or even reputational harm. So you'll find that part of recruitment processes do have a risk assessment that's built into it, mainly because of these reasons. Okay, so when we talk about background checks, okay, criminal history, employment and education verification, credit and financial checks, that's where applicable. And then driver's license, PDP verification, again, that is specific to those relevant roles. If you have a driver or even a truck driver, you would need sort of those specific licenses for that. Okay, so again, these checks sort of help verify whether the candidate um, or the applicant at that stage, the applicant has, any criminal records. You also ensuring that, if there's anything that comes up as a red flag, your risk assessment will help you on how to also deal with that. Okay, so again, you can see it is important to have that. Also, when it comes to, qualification checks, you want to make sure that you are ensuring that qualification checks are done. Okay, so you're confirming academic records and professional certifications. Okay, again, you need to make sure that you are checking that against, whether it be SACWA or if it's a professional certification, that you are actually confirming that the person has a professional standing with that professional body. Validate references with structured questions. We spoke about this earlier. In terms of getting references, you're not just asking random questions. It should be a structured set of questions, again, maintaining consistency. And then assess any technical competencies if needed. So if somebody needs to have, a specific competency when it comes to that role that they are applying for, you want to make sure that they are being assessed on that. Okay, so that's when our technical based questions, all of that come into play. That will help us to determine whether that person meets the requirements, if that's required in a specific role. In terms of benefits, okay, so ensures integrity and job suitability. It reduces turnover, any sort of disciplinary risk, builds a culture of accountability and compliance. Okay, so again, ultimately, when we're looking at, um, screening, all of these processes that we've gone through thus far, you can see that it helps us to ensure that we avoid hiring. Okay, that sounds a bit bad. Oh, avoid us making poor hires. There we go. Okay, we want to ensure that we are hiring people that are fit for role. Okay, that they hold the necessary skills and abilities to perform the job. Okay, we're also looking at retention of those individuals, that they're not just going to, up and leave after the first week or 2 weeks. Okay, um, they are in an environment where, there's a positive company culture. um, there's in the terms of our processes, we are ensuring that there's compliance with all the legislative um, requirements that's in South Africa. Okay, so again, you can see how all of this ties in. Also, just to also remember that when we are doing background and qualification checks, we always need to give written consent from applicants. Okay, so we can't just get the information and send it off. We have to get written consent. And this is now in terms of like the POPI Act, we have to abide by that. Okay, so we can't just get people's information and send it off. We always have to get it's to show um, respect and professionalism in the process. Any questions on risk assessments, background and qualification checks? Okay, so let's look at the office supervisor's role in creating job profiles and adverts. Okay, so as an office supervisor, okay, again, your role in shaping the job profile and the job advertisement is is needed. Okay, so you have that responsibility to do that. Um, and what does that mean for you in terms of that now? Okay, so you would need to be able to clarify the daily task because you're the closest person to the day-to-day activities within your team. Okay, so you clearly outline what the job entails. Okay, you want to ensure that you're including any sort of typical duties, if there's any team interactions, and how that role sort of supports the greater um, business goals or broader business goals. Okay, collaborate with stakeholders. Okay, so engagement with, for example, HR, department heads, and team members for well-rounded input. Okay, so this ensures that the role is accurately defined and aligned again, both from an operational and also a strategic perspective. Okay, in terms of identify critical skills. Okay, so again, technical example, Excel, scheduling tools, and if there's any soft skills that's needed, communication. You know what sort of skills are needed in your team, okay, be it the technical or even the soft skills. So you need to almost detail that and outline it when you are advertising or creating that job profile. Assessing the cultural fit, okay, so you need to understand, um, you need to know what your team dynamics are. Okay. And from that, you then consider what sort of personality traits that person would need to have, what sort of work style and alignment to your team's values. Okay. So you want to almost recommend attributes that will align to your team's working style. And also, you know, it's not only that you want to have someone that's also going to come in, adapt to the team, but also, improve the team morale and that sort of thing. So almost having a team player will be beneficial as an example. Okay. Defining performance expectations. Okay. So you would then need to outline what the key deliverables and success indicators are from a performance perspective. Okay. So you are helping define what success looks like in your team. Okay. Is it that there's an expectation of task completion or customer satisfaction or an improvement in processes. Okay, you need to be clear on the expectations. Supporting job advertisement development. Okay, so that's your ads, job ads now. Okay, you want to help your HR team write the job ads so that they are clear and they are honest. Okay, you want to make sure that the ad mirrors the actual profile of the job. Okay, it's not, you're not over or understating sort of the requirements. You want to ensure that it's exactly as per what is expected of that person. In terms of key advertisement details, okay, so you want to suggest um, what to include. So now that's your job titles, the responsibilities, who will they report to, so reporting lines, um, the required experience, and also the deadline, contact details, um, you know, working hours, whatever it may be that you feel will be needed or that forms part of key details in that role, you need to be able to add that in. Okay. So that's looking at creating job profiles and adverts. Any questions on this slide? Okay, let's move on to our next slide, where we will be looking at receiving and filing job applications. Okay. So we need to ensure that there's a structured process again when it comes to receiving and filing of job applications. Okay, it needs to be um, a clear system. You want to um, almost mirror this system so that if a new person comes into the team, they're following that as a structured process, as an example. Okay, so it could be a central inbox or recruitment platform, example, an ATS system. Okay. If there's no ATS system, it could be your email inbox that you're using with folders in it. And this helps you stay organized. Okay. So organized file naming and a folder system. If you have an ATS system, so that's your applicant tracking system. Okay, this system helps you to almost auto sort CVs and also rank candidates based on how well they are suited or matched to that job profile. Okay, so that's sort of a good benefit to have an ATS system. Um, in terms of acknowledging the receipt, okay, so an automated response or an email to confirm the submission. It's always a best practice to send out an auto reply email acknowledging the receipt of each application. Okay, again, it also helps to improve your company's image. Um, it also helps the candidate to know that their application hasn't just gone into oblivion, it's actually received by the organization. Set review timelines. Okay, so you want to define your review timelines up front. Okay, again, this sort of prevents any bottlenecks. It lets you also update your HR team or management on, expected shortlisting dates. Okay, so it's very important to have those review times. In terms of the review criteria, aligning with job requirements, you need to be able to fully understand the job description before you screen um, applicants. Okay, so again, you're focusing on qualifications, experience, culture fit. And if you're using, again, an ATS system, this will help you because it can automatically highlight sort of your top candidates that come up through the system. Okay. In terms of confidentiality, ensuring confidentiality, you keep candidate data private, secure, okay, confidential, and you want to minimize or limit the access, um, to only those who are involved in that recruitment process, okay, and obviously ensuring that there's a secure way of storing all of that candidate data. This could be, for example, if you're using like a shared drive, only specific people have access to that shared drive, or having password protections on any platforms. If you're using, again, an ATS system, only specific individuals will have access to that. And then lastly, Poppy Act compliance. Okay. So again, in South Africa, when it comes to us processing personal candidate information, we need to be able to do it in accordance to what um, the Poppy Act tells us. Okay, so again, it's about ensuring that we are getting consent from candidates so that we can process the information. We're also ensuring that we have transparency in terms of how that data will be used. And how it will be stored, or whatever that is, we need to be able to outline that when it comes to this process here. Are there any questions on receiving and filing job applications? Okay, so let's now look at understanding what the screening and shortlisting process is when it comes to the recruitment process now. Okay, so we need to understand the screening process. Okay, so once we have received applications, um, we're looking for people that meet the requirements. Okay, so again, this is sort of your initial filter to remove any applicants that don't meet minimum requirements of that job. Okay, and again, this is often happens simultaneously with shortlisting. Okay, so you do that, and you're also shortlisting suitable candidates. Um, and this if you are in an organization that does this manually, you will see that there's an overlap of the both processes. If you're using ATS system, then each of that gets done separately. In terms of determining a shortlist criteria, okay, so we look at two um, sets of criteria here. Okay, so you have the essential criteria, the must-haves. Again, qualifications, licenses, experiences. Okay, these are your non-negotiables when it comes to this role. Okay, so for example, if you have um, that role requires a person to have a driver's license, you are being specific to say they need to have a code 8 or a code 10, whatever it may be, or a specific or a PDP, whatever it may be, you are being specific on that essential criteria. Again, it's a must have. Desirable criteria, that's a nice to have. Okay, so this could be now your additional certifications or industry exposure. Okay, so these are things that are almost like your attributes to that role or to that position. Okay, it's nice. Again, we say it's a nice to have because it'll be things that could enhance a candidate's application, but they're not necessarily a mandatory requirement. Okay, this could be sort of a professional development or industry specific experience. Um, if it's an example. So if you have somebody that, is in maybe a finance role, but they come in with a specific set of skills that could help the finance department, with again something in that role, that's a nice to have. But again, the mandatory requirement is a qualification or that experience for that role. Okay, so you want to also think about these things from an essential criteria and desirable criteria. Yes, we look at the must-haves, but you also want to see some of the nice-to-haves because again, it could add value to your team. Okay. Use a short list scorecard. Okay, so you list each criterion with a rating scale. Okay, the scorecards create again a structured way to assess applications. Okay, when it comes to objectively and comparing candidates by using this structured scorecard, we can look at what is desirable, what is essential criteria. It'll help us to look at that score fairly, and also could be a situation where we can balance it out, and that could add value again to that person's chances of becoming shortlisted for that role. Okay, okay. So when we look at conducting pre-screening interviews, okay, when we conduct our pre-screening interviews, we clarify any gaps in the person's career history. We look at the salary, the availability to start a new position in terms of working a notice, whether they are immediately available or they have to serve, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, a calendar month, and also motivation in terms of why they've applied for that role. Okay, so once you've shortlisted the people or the applicants or your top applicants, um, you want to make sure that you're doing a brief telephonic call. Okay, again, it saves time by filtering unsuitable candidates for formal interviews commence. Okay, so when you are asking these sort of clarifying questions during your pre-screening process, so like when they can start, if their flexibility in terms of if the role requires them to travel, what their salary expectations are, you're getting an idea of you know, whether that person is fitting the role of starting of the person starting as soon as possible, as an example, or it's someone that you can wait for a month or 2 months or whatever it may be. Okay. So again, you're determining all of this by, you know, ensuring that we meet the essential criteria. If they have desirable criteria, the nice to haves, that's also helpful. But if you are hiring for or screening for a position that's needed as soon as possible, like within a month, sometimes the people that you shortlisted may not be able to start as soon as you need them to. Or it could be other negatives where they are not flexible to travel, as an example, or they are looking more for a work from home environment or a hybrid environment. All of that could come out in your pre-screening interviews. Any questions on screening and shortlisting candidates? Okay, so let's look now at preparing for and participating in an interview. Okay, so again, we want to ensure that we are reviewing the job description as we mentioned earlier. Okay, so again, ensure it's current and accurate. You want to use the most recent job description. Try and avoid ones that have been used in the past and bears no relevance to the actual role right now. Okay, you want to clarify any responsibilities, skills, and expectations. Okay, you need to go over the candidate's information. You need to study this information. Okay, so study the CV, look at the cover letter, and if the person has an online profile, have a look at that as well. Okay. Again, these are now notes for you to talk about during the interview. You're preparing for all these points for the interview. If there's any employment gaps or unclear job titles, you make a note of that so you can question respectfully about that. And then in terms of structure, the interview process, okay, you're creating an interview schedule, you're allocating time for introductions, core questions, Q&As. Okay, so it needs to form a proper structured process. Prepare interview questions, okay, base questions on the job role. You want to include a mix of technical, behavioral, and situational questions. Okay, this is very important so that you can get an idea whether people have technical skills. You're able to determine how they would behave in certain situations. Um, uh, or environments, and then also situational questions to see how, for example, the ability to problem solve, and what sort of skills they would use in certain situations. And then practice your interviewing style. You want to always maintain professionalism and engagement. Okay, so be clear, courteous, and always ensure professionalism. And you also want to show a bit of confidence when you're interviewing. Okay. Are there any questions for prepare for and participate in an interview? Okay, so our next slide talks about assisting in communicating interview results. Okay, so what are some of the best practices for communicating interview results? So when it comes to prompt communication, we always say that, time is of the essence. Okay. Candidates will always appreciate when they have updates that are shared promptly. Okay. So timelessly. Um, delayed communication would will make someone feel naturally frustrated or create sort of fears of uncertainty, and that may not even be the case. Okay, so once a final decision is made, so a hiring decision has been made, whether it's an offer or rejection, it needs to be shared with the candidate as soon as possible. Maintain a professional tone. Okay, so when we talk about maintaining your professional tone, your tone reflects the organization's brand. Okay, so you're a representative of the company. So how you communicate is a reflection of the company. So even if a candidate is found unsuccessful, a respectful tone will always be good. It's professional. It helps preserve a good relationship um, in terms of a way forward. You could have that person come in and interview for a role in the future, and you'd never want them to have that negative experience. Okay. Expressing gratitude. Okay. So you want to ensure that you are starting your message off with, a genuineness. Okay. So you want to, for example, you can say, we thank you for your interest in the position, and the time that you had taken to attend the interview. Okay. So that sort of sets a positive, again, tone. You're expressing their gratitude for taking time off to come through. Um, and it's regardless of the outcome, right? You still, whether it's an unsuccessful or successful, you starting or you showing that appreciation. Again, you thank applicants for their time, interest, and participation. You keep feedback simple and neutral. Okay, so if a candidate is unsuccessful, a simple and polite note will suffice. Okay, so you don't really want to go overboard. You don't want to um, start comparing candidates or start revealing too many internal decisions. Okay. So you want to avoid that because, again, this could sort of open up a bit of legal risk to the organization. So, again, just ensure that it is neutral and it's simple. You want to also wish them well. Okay. So you always end on a positive note. You want to encourage them in their continued job search. Okay, so we wish you well and all the best in your career journey. And again, you want to thank them for their interest in applying to your organization. Okay, and again, going back to saying that even though somebody may be unsuccessful, you never know where the future may lie, and it could be that somebody could come back and apply for a different position um, in the organization. So you want to always maintain a good first and last impression, irrespective of how that outcome may be. Okay, so that's assisting in communicating interview results. Any questions on this slide? Okay, so the next two slides are just going through sort of your critical documents in recruitment and the selection process. Okay, so I've indicated all the documents that's needed, the purpose of the document, um, and you can see that it's quite a long list of documents. But again, all of this will form part of your um, sort of your structured process when it comes to the recruitment process. Okay, so again, we have our job description, we have our job advertisements, the application, our cover letters, interview guides, selection grid, background check, consent form, grants permission for employment verifications, reference check form, offer letter, employment contract, or rejection letter or email, and then confidentiality agreement, induction material, and then the recruitment record. So you can see all of the documents that's highlighted here are following some of the steps of how we go through the recruitment process. Okay, so that takes us to the end of our slide deck when it's with regards to recruitment and selection. Are there any questions on this topic? Is everybody good? Okay. I hope I did not bore you all to sleep. Okay, so I'm just looking at the time. So we now at 7:30. I'm thinking before we get on to the next topic, okay, which is our performance management, should we have maybe you let me know whether you're comfortable with a 5-10 minute breather, comfort break, have a cup of coffee. Anyone? Good. So we are now at 19:32. Shall we come back at, are we saying thumbs up for a break or are we saying continue? Okay, let's do 5 minutes. Happy with that. Okay, I can't seem to type in this now. Oh, there we go. Let's be back at 19. Things not working here. Uh, okay, so before we go on the break, do I still have everybody with me? Yes, no. Okay. I just want to quickly take you through our formative assessment for these topics. Okay, so last week, when we had our first session, our first webinar, I did not take you through your formative, but remember, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be going through each topic, and your formative assessments are going to be based after each topic. Do you want me to, shall we go ahead with it now? Hey, you comfortable? We can just go through just the questions on these topics. I think I have it open already. Okay. Okay. Okay, so everybody can see my screen. Okay, so let's just quickly go through this. You can see that in this formative assessment guide, oopsie. So again, it's our knowledge module 1. This is learner workbook 2 of 2. Okay, so You would have a workbook, which is one of one, which would be for last week's topics. Okay. I will go through that as well. But for now, because we've gone through the recruitment topic, all of that is part of this formative assessment guide. Okay, so you can see here that this formative assessment guide talks to our recruitment and selection, our basic performance management, which we will discuss next. Okay, it'll be on our discipline, which will be part of our recording sessions. Okay, so discipline, supervisory skills for office supervisors, um, organizing and coordinating work activities, and coaching and mentoring will be our pre-recorded sessions and the slide decks. Okay. Again, our authenticity declaration, this is to confirm that all the work that you complete in this formative assessment guide is your own work, okay, and that you completed it by yourself. Please, very important, if you have any issues with this fillable document, my suggestion is that you complete your answers to the questions first and then come back last to this page and you can complete in your details like that, okay? Can't spell my own surname. So that's our authenticity declaration by a learner. Okay, again, completed by yourself. The work you're handing in is your own work and knowledge. You understand that you can only be credited for this qualification if you hand in your assessments and you complete any portfolio of evidence that may be required and that are authentic. So you also confirm and accept that the portfolio and the required documents are your own work. Also very important, you will abide by the provider's code of conduct for learners. Okay, so note to the learner, all of this information, I'm not going to go through it. I want you to just go and read over. I want to go over more the questions for your formative guide, but please, it is very important for you to understand all of this information and also go through the purpose of the knowledge module. Okay, in this section here, it explains the guidelines for your topics, okay, how it's been weighted, what is your internal assessment criteria. Again, as we mentioned, your internal assessment criteria tests your knowledge. So if it says here, identify and explain steps of recruitment selections, it is testing to see your understanding and your ability to explain the steps of recruitment and selection. Okay. And you can see here that the topics that we've spoken about, so again, I did recruitment and selection, and the next topic we're going to do is basic performance management. Pre-recorded will be discipline and supervisory skills for office supervisors. Please stop me if I'm passing through something that you have a question or you need clarity on, okay? So let's look at formative activity 5. Okay, so recruitment and selection. Okay, identify the aspects that must be in place before a reference check is conducted. Okay, so it's a multiple choice question. You have 4 potential answers here. So again, it's out of 2 marks. Okay, so you're going to look at the question, identify the aspects that must be in place before a reference check is conducted. Next question, match the following assessment type with the following description. These tests are important for roles that require strong interpersonal or leadership. Question 3, select the statement that relates to set timelines from the list below. And question 4, state whether the following statement is essential criteria or desirable criteria. Okay, and that is the questions for recruitment and selection. I will keep this open and I will go through our formative assessment questions for the next topic when we come back. Okay. We good? I just need to change the time on our break. Okay, so now we'll be back at 7:45. Okay, I'll see you back shortly. Hi, everyone. Can I just check that everybody is back? Yes, we're back. Okay, perfect. Okay, let's continue with our next topic, which is performance management. Just want to smooth that here. Okay, so with our next topic, again, it's basic performance management. This is now topic, we can call it maybe topic 3.2. Okay, and we'll be looking at the following points: explain performance appraisal as a component of performance management. Okay, and then describe the process to conduct performance appraisals in line with organizational policies and procedures. Okay, so let's look at planning when it comes to performance management. Okay, so we're looking at this is your broader. So performance management is an entire cycle that we have in an organization. Okay, so in this sort of planning stage, um, performance management will have to follow through with ensuring that there is clarity on the process, okay, and also ensuring that it's aligning with our broader organizational strategy. We also need to align individual goals to that. Okay, so let's look at now in terms of collaborating with employees. We look at creating SMART goals. Okay, again, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound. Okay, so these goals are critical because we need to bring again structure, and we need to ensure that the employee knows exactly what's expected of them. You also want to ensure that you're involving the employee in this goal setting, right? We do that because we want them to be motivated, and they will feel more invested in the process if they understand it from the get-go. Okay, so again, specific, it's clear, it's well-defined goals, right? We are measuring it, so it's quantifiable, it has success indicators, it is achievable. So you are challenging it, you're challenging, but you're also being realistic. Relevant, these are aligned with our business priorities. And in time bound, there are clear deadlines and milestones. Okay, so we want to also ensure that we are creating almost a solid personal development plan, so your PDP. And again, this aligns with personal growth. Again, we have to remember the company needs. And when it comes to performance management, it's not just about output. Okay, so I think a common thing is about we want the person to just perform constantly, but we also want to ensure that we are developing them as well, right? So we're developing talent, growing them. Um, it's for succession planning, all of that stuff. So again, not just measuring performance for the sake of it, but it's a beneficial process for, again, both the organization as well as the employee. Okay, so that's now the first sort of stage. Okay, so we are now creating these SMART goals. Okay, and then the next stage we look at is our monitoring and monitoring and reviewing of performance. Okay, so that's the second and third stage of performance management. Okay, so monitoring is ongoing, and this sort of keeps the momentum going, so that we don't lose track or forget to do, like regular check-ins, all of that. It's regular one-on-one sessions. These sessions also allow managers to track the progress. If there's any sort of issues that have been picked up, we're dealing with it at that point, then we can offer coaching. If there's any tools or support needed, we are doing it during that sort of time frame. Okay, and then update goals if business needs change. If there is a shift in how the organization is going, we need to align those goals again to that employee's performance goals. Okay, and then in terms of reviewing, that's the end of the cycle. Okay, we don't want to we need it to be formal. We don't want it to be informal because then it skews the whole transparency in the process. Okay, so during the review stage, office supervisor, managers, and the employee will come in and they reflect on the outcomes, right? And they look at the journey in terms of their performance. You will also find that, if there's any if you're whilst you're evaluating the performance and effort, you're assessing the skills and looking at the challenges faced. All of that adds value in terms of the performance management process, because this can also help you to identify where there were any uh, kind of like roadblocks in that journey and how that came about. Could it be that, when in the monitoring process, um, you found that the monthly check-ins were um, a bit too much to do, and you found more value in the quarterly monitoring process. That's something that you can look at in terms of reviewing. Okay. Also, did the employee meet the expectations? Okay. Were the goals that were set at the first stage, were they realistic? Okay. Was it something that, the individual can grow professionally? Is it a constructive conversation, or is it something that's just based on rating? It needs to be, the review process needs to just it needs to be aligned um, to ensure that the rating process is successful. Okay, and also that it's not just a tick box exercise and there's no value add to the employee. Okay, so it needs to be very structured, as we said, and we also use this to improve, future PDPs, so personal development plans. Okay, then we're going to look at rewarding performance. Okay, so this is now stage 4 of the performance management process. Okay, and this is now to motivate, retain, and reinforce high performance. Okay, so types of rewards, it's in some cases, it's not just about only money. It could be about recognition. People want to know that their efforts are seen and valued. So it could, you could have a structured reward system in your organization, and this obviously will boost morale in your team or with your employees, and also that motivates for high performance. So the type of rewards that we look at is there could be sort of salary adjustments or a one-time performance bonus, extra annual leave or flexible working perks, promotion and new responsibilities. It could be public praise or employee recognition events, positive written performance appraisal, training or leadership opportunities. Okay. And these sort of reward principles, are clear, um, they are clearly defined, and, it also helps people to achieve their goals. Being transparent and performance based, employees can see when, recognition is unfair or it's inconsistent. So you want to ensure that the process is fair across all teams. There's no biasness based on who the individual is, and if situations like that happen, it could actually lead to, unfair processes, um, uh, inconsistency in your organization, demotivation, or even could create conflict within your team. Okay, so always ensure that these are fair across the team and they are tied directly to goals and contributions within your organization. Okay, so that's just the high level on our performance management process. Any questions on the stages we've gone through now? Sorry, I was on mute. So we're now going to look at performance appraisal. Okay, so what is performance appraisal? So we spoke about performance management. Okay, so we said that this is um, part of an entire cycle. The performance appraisal is now a component of our performance management cycle. Okay, so it's more than just sort of a check-in or an evaluation that's done annually. And a performance appraisal is used as a checkpoint within the performance management cycle. Okay, so we checking in and we call it the performance appraisal to make sure that we are keeping on track. And the purpose of it is to ensure that we are aligning the employees' contributions or abilities to the greater organization strategic direction. Okay. In terms of the main objectives of it is to we ensure that there is feedback and communication. So we're addressing if there's any concerns, highlighting the achievements, identifying if there's any strengths, any weaknesses in terms of the person's abilities. And obviously, if there's any weaknesses, we are supporting and addressing that, aligning goals with company strategy, and you're recognizing performance, example, by bonuses, salary increases, or any sort of other form of acknowledgement, and you're supporting your employees' growth, motivating and engaging, and you identify any underperformance and you provide solutions to ensure that there is growth for that employee. Okay, so that's looking at our performance appraisal and what it actually is. We're now going to look at the different types of performance appraisals. Okay, so you have sort of your common types of performance appraisals. Okay, so we call it a traditional appraisal, which is your manager-led appraisal. It's periodic evaluation, and that's done, every 6 months, or it's done annually. Okay, so remember, when it comes to performance appraisals, it's dependent on the method that an organization chooses. Okay, so they have probably a specific structure, or the way that the performance appraisals are designed is based on, more on the strategic goals, or the company culture. So as we were looking at the traditional one now, this is something, this traditional appraisal is a commonly used one in an organization. Okay, so again, it involves a manager conducting a periodic review. Okay, and this is normally done annually, biannually, and this is now based on a um, set goals, KPIs, so key performance indicators and behaviors, and it is seen as efficient. Sometimes with this sort of traditional appraisal, it could miss the day-to-day contribution of an employee. Okay, because this, remember, it's done every 6 months or annually. So it's not really something that can consider if there's contributions done, from a day-to-day perspective. But again, it's depending on the organization and whether this is something that the sort of appraisal they prefer to use. Then the next one is a self-appraisal. Okay, so employee rates their own performance. This type of appraisal allows the employee to evaluate their own performance before the actual performance or formal review. And it is sort of seen as valuable because, again, it promotes their reflection, their own self-awareness, looks at their accountability. And, managers often compare the self-evaluation with their own findings or ratings. And this can now be a useful um, discussion, and it also could provide a lot of insight into, what sort of expectations there are from both an employee and a manager, and then look at how they can align those. Then we look at an employee-initiated review. Okay, so this is now, think of a managing upward situation. So it's on-demand, employee-led. Okay, so instead of a scheduled or the employee waiting for scheduled appraisals, employees can actually request for a review to be done when they feel that it's appropriate. Maybe they've achieved something in their team, maybe something really good in the project, so now they want to be reviewed. Okay, so this also, this sort of adds empowerment for an employee. They're taking ownership of their growth, and they are pushing for their continuous growth. They are opening up that dialogue for them to show their ability to grow in the organization. Okay. Then we have a 360 feedback. Okay, so it's multiple raters, which is peers, supervisors, or clients. And again, it's a method that gathers feedback from multiple sources. Okay, so this could be the employee themselves, it could be their peers, um, direct reports, and in some cases, depending on the type of organization you're in, it could be clients. So it's ideal for a leadership role or a customer-facing role. Um, and again, it also provides, a comprehensive view of that person's performance. But again, it needs to be, I think, sort of handled carefully because, again, you could, face a bit of biasness and, there could be a bit of breach of confidentiality. So this 360 feedback, very beneficial, but again, it does come with a bit of risk. Then you have a group appraisal, so assesses the team performance. Okay, these are used in your in environments um, that have a high level of collaboration. Okay, so this is now from a team collective performance. So group appraisals, these can add value because you can strengthen your team's accountability. We can look at the dynamics of it, if there's any inefficiencies, and it looks at the team's overall success. Okay, so again, we still have to ensure that even though it's a group appraisal, but we need to also look at people's individual contributions within that group. And then lastly, there's something called an upward appraisal. Okay, so this is employees assess their manager, right? So again, this is now almost like a flipped version or reverse model, feedback model of where now an employee provides feedback or input on their manager's performance. Okay, again, it helps from a leadership perspective, creates transparency. Um, it must also be structured well and also needs to be kept anonymous because you want to ensure that there's honest feedback, but also you don't want it to be a situation where people feel a bit afraid of being open and honest because of what the repercussions could be. Okay, so again, we've gone through now the common types of performance appraisals. Again, as I mentioned earlier, these are based on the organization's preference. So, whether we are looking at a traditional appraisal method, or a 360 feedback, we need to always ensure that we are following, again, a very structured process and it's fair and consistent across all employees. Are there any questions on types of performance appraisals? Okay, so now we're going to go in and look at the steps in terms of performance appraisal process. Okay, so we have preparation, the structure of the discussion, and then giving feedback. Okay, so during the preparation, we review the employee's past performance, and then we set a professional tone for the discussion, which is scheduled meeting, but also make sure that we are setting a professional tone. In terms of structuring the discussion, okay, so during the appraisal process, you want to ensure that you are, explaining the purpose of it, discuss the various ratings involved, development, what sort of expectations there are. And then at the end, you want to ensure that you are summarizing and agreeing on the next steps. Okay. We have to ensure that we are giving feedback. Okay. So focus on behaviors, not just the personality. Be specific and balance. Very important part of the process. Okay. Again, this sets the tone, ensures that there's transparency, and also allows for accountability from the employee as well as the manager. So when we spoke earlier, and I think even in the recruitment topic, we discussed bias, various biases or biasness behavior, etc. So what are some of the rater bias we need to look out for? Okay, so there are 8 common ones or common rater biases that can actually negatively influence the performance appraisal process and also could lead to very negative or unfair outcomes. So we have something called the halo effect. Okay, one strong positive trait influences ratings in all areas. So what that means is that you could have one positive attribute, okay? And this could be, for example, you like being very punctual. And this causes the rater to almost feel or to assume that the employee excels in all other areas, um, even when there's like no supporting evidence. Okay, so because the person is punctual, there's an automatic um, assumption made that the person is now, they good in every other area when that's not actually true. So again, that is seen as a bias, and that's called the halo effect. Then you have the horns effect, and it's one negative trait unfairly lowers ratings in unrelated areas. So now this is the opposite of halo effect. Okay, so that could be you know somebody having just trying to think of an example. They are they deal very poor in conflict management situations. They get, they could be that they are very quiet and reserved and they don't like to deal with conflict. This could almost set a scene and again, an assumption that they are poor or negative in all other unrelated areas. Okay. Then you have the leniency bias. The rater scores everyone too positively. Okay, so they want to be the nice person. They don't see the negative, um, or they don't want to admit the negative. Okay, so they want to give high scores to avoid conflict. Okay, and again because they want to be the good person. Then you get the strictness bias. Okay, the rater is overly critical and scores everyone too harshly. Okay, so again, this is not the opposite of a leniency bias. They find the negative in everybody and then they overly critical and they negatively score people. Central tendency bias, the rater avoids extreme scores and rates everybody average. Okay, so this is when the rater plays it safe. They rather go and rate everybody more on an average point of view. So like if depending on your on your scale, if it's like out of 5, then they rather just go on 3, and they try not to go too low or too high. Even if somebody is underperforming or overperforming, they would almost stick to a 3. And then you have a contrast effect. So the rater compares employees to each other rather than to their performance standards. Okay, so this is now again self-explanatory. Especially if you have somebody that's a high performer or a poor performer, rather than judging people based on what the objectives are in terms of their role, etc., they would rather, group people up and compare them to each other. Um, and that's seen as very poor, that employee X can do something better than you. It should never be about that. It should be based on everybody's own specific criteria in terms of what they do and their role, etc. Then you have recency bias. Okay, so recent events overshadow employees' overall performance. Okay, so that could be a situation where somebody performed really well in something in one specific area, and that influenced a positive um, a performance appraisal for them, but it's only on one specific criteria. It wasn't on the entire set of criteria, but it's because they performed well on that. Again, it's overshadowing all the other performance criteria, and again, that's seen as a bias, and it could be the opposite as well. Okay, rater gives could be a negative where they did something incorrect and that set the scene for the entire performance appraisal. Then you have a similar to me effect. The rater gives high ratings to employees who are similar to them in background, beliefs, or personality. Okay, so this is something where the rater and the employee have shared interests, so similarities. Okay, and this is almost like an unconscious bias, if you can say that, uh, because they get along and they share, maybe they like the same sporting team, they come from backgrounds that are very similar, they have almost like a similar communication style, or whatever it may be, they share similarities, and that could be seen as a bias. Okay, so that's the 8 common rater biases that we don't actually realize, but are actually quite evident when it comes to performance appraisals. Are there any questions on the 8 biases? Okay, so let's go on to giving effective feedback. Okay, so feedback that builds trust and growth. If we do this process correctly, it can be something that adds a lot of value to employees. It'll be positive, regardless of whichever way it goes. But if we're doing it in a proper manner, um, it helps maintain that structured approach that we spoke about earlier. Okay, so focus on behavior, not on personal traits. Okay, so you want to avoid sort of going into and say and being specific about certain behaviors. You need to stick to the facts pertaining to that criteria. Um, Perhaps the behavior that must be dealt with from a disciplinary point of view. Remember, when it comes to performance management, it only looks at the employee's performance. It does not necessarily take in the behaviors, because the expectation is that employees be dealt with from a disciplinary point of view when it comes to behavior. Um, you'll find that there is a common um, mix up when it comes to whether it's something dealing with performance or behavior, and can often be difficult to determine. But if you're following the performance appraisal properly and looking at specific criteria, then you shouldn't have an issue. And in terms of behavior, if you find an issue there, then you look at, for example, the company's disciplinary code of conduct, and that will help guide you. So again, focus on behavior, not personal traits. Use clear, specific examples, okay? Avoid being vague or avoid exaggerating statements. Be specific on examples. Be compassionate but direct, okay? So you don't want to be too hard. You need to still show compassion regardless. So if somebody is underperforming, you know, you need to seek to understand why, right? Um, so always show compassion there. Avoid generalizations. So, example, always or never. So that's not speaking directly at them and stating, like you you always fail to do this or you always fail to do that and you never do X, Y, and Z. Okay, so don't generalize, be specific. Understand root causes of performance. Okay, again, that's probing because you want to understand why somebody's underperforming. And then you end with encouragement and next steps. Okay, so the entire process here is you want to identify if there's any personal issues, any training gaps, um, any sort of you know, that sort of issues that could come about that's affecting somebody's performance. But the only time you're doing that is when you're having um, a direct conversation with the person. And again, you're not in that conversation to attack them or belittle them, but you're there because you need to support them through this process. Okay, so what is the purpose of a performance appraisal? Okay, why why is it important? Why does it matter? Okay, so again, it's not just a process where we check boxes. Okay, again, it's a tool that organizations use um, to lead in that journey of, you know, reaching organizational goals, sticking to sort of the strategies that's out there. Um, and, it also motivates employees. It shapes the culture of your organization. So when we look at the purpose of a performance appraisal, it should never just be somebody coming into a role and carrying on. It should be monitored. There should be a performance management process in place for them. You want to ensure that you're providing formal, consistent feedback on job performance. Okay, so if somebody is doing well, it's not because you want to, you know, get them all excited for no reason, but you're acknowledging that. Okay, you are consistently providing this feedback, whether it's good or bad even if they're underperforming. You identify and acknowledge employee contributions and achievements. Okay, you highlight areas for improvement and you support career development, inform key HR decisions. So this helps you with promotions, further training, succession planning, or disciplinary actions. Okay, enhance trust, engagement, and communication between managers and employees. Okay, so that's the purpose of our performance appraisal. Does anyone have any questions before we go through the steps in terms of performance appraisal? Okay, so let's look at step 1 and 2, which is preparation and goal alignment. Okay, so again, you prepare a meaningful appraisal. You want to ensure that you are taking the time to review um, your appraisal policies. Okay, so you understand the full scope of the employee's performance. You are not just looking, at recent events. You are, you know, making sure that you are doing it in a confidential manner. Okay, so first step is to make sure that you understand the timelines. If there's timelines and the rating systems, all the documents that you need to complete during this process. And then in terms of confidentiality, always ensure that it's in a confidential and private space. Okay, so you don't want to do it in an open office setting. The data that you're gathering, you're using KPI reports. Okay, so you're using information that's current. You don't not using for information that's old and outdated. If necessary, you can get feedback from peers or clients. If there's any projects undertaken recently, you use that results from there and attendance records. Okay. Also schedule and notify. You choose a quiet, uninterrupted time, and you give the employee sufficient notice to prepare. You don't want to catch them off guard and let them know that tomorrow is going to be we starting a process to prepare you for performance appraisal. You are going to give them sufficient time. We spoke about SMART goals earlier, where we need to ensure that we have there's alignment with on SMART goals. You're reviewing your employee goals for specificity, measurability, achievability, relevance, and time boundness. Okay, so again, very important, use the SMART goal method. You encourage self-assessment. Okay, so you ask employees to reflect and submit their input before the meeting. Okay, we need to ensure that through this process that there is alignment, okay, with both the employee as well as what the expectations are of you as a manager or an office supervisor. Again, your expectations are aligned to the greater business goals. Okay, so that's step 1 and 2, which is preparation and goal alignment. Step 3 is conducting the evaluation meeting. Okay, so again, this meeting it needs to be a partnership. It's not a one-sided or one-directed way of meeting. Okay, so it's an open conversation. You open the conversation with appreciation and purpose. Okay, you start with what went well. So you begin with reviewing goals and accomplishments, and then you start discussing challenges. Um, speak if there's any sort of behaviors that are not aligning with the goals. Um, you're not talking about the person themselves again. Okay, so we're not making it a personal situation. We are talking more on them not meeting the criteria, etc. And you use specific examples. Okay, so you highlight key achievements with examples. You want to address development areas honestly and respectfully. Okay, so that's where now you engage the employee and you ask them on their perspective, right? Um, how do they view their own performance? Okay, so when you do that, you are, you're passing it back to them to share whether, they see that they perhaps are not on the right track, or they're happy with their performance. Um, Share ratings if applicable and explain the rationale. So again, if they are, for example, low ratings, you want to share that because that's going to use or set the tone for how you can build on the next steps. Okay. You also, when we spoke about it's a two-way stream of communication, so you allow time for the employee to respond, clarify, and reflect. You don't want it to be a rushed process. You need to allow time if there's any questions that need to be asked, etc. And then record discussion outcomes and agreed upon points. Very important in the process. If there isn't any documentation to support that discussion, it's as if that discussion did not occur. So you often hear the term paper trail. So it means that there has to be evidence to support that a conversation actually happened. Okay, so always ensure that you're recording points, especially when it comes to agreed upon points. The next step in the process is feedback. Okay, so step 4 and 5, feedback, discussion, and appraisal meeting. Okay, so this step now is talking us through how the actual process is happening. Okay, so again, we are scheduling the meeting. It's a private, quiet space. The employee has enough notice. You're avoiding interruptions. You're focusing on the objectives. Okay, explain the purpose. So again, reviewing the performance, providing constructive feedback, discussing any development and growth. You're setting expectations for a two-way discussion. Encourage open dialogue. How do you feel about your performance this year? What are your biggest challenges or achievements? You're actively listening and you're taking notes. You're creating a safe environment for honest conversation. Okay. Then the next two steps are about the feedback as well as a way forward. Okay. So again, you're providing constructive feedback. You're sharing both positive feedback and areas for improvement. You're using specific examples to illustrate your points and you help the employee understand their performance. You review the employee's progress towards achieving their goals and you discuss any adjustments or new objectives. Okay, so it's very important that in terms of this entire process, it is structured, okay, and it's not a one-sided process. It's a two-way conversation. You're providing feedback and you're also discussing the next steps. Then we're going to look at step 6 and 7, which is now talking about the actual development support and performance gaps. So in the previous steps where you have conducted your evaluation meeting and you found that there are areas that need improvement, this is where you come in now, where you are actually putting that together in terms of an action plan. Okay, so the focus needs now to shift from um, you know, you have to shift the focus to now supporting the employee. Okay, so now you're going to look at how we're going to help them, um, you know, develop those skills in the areas where they're falling short, or if they are now in a position where they are doing well, they have a positive outcome after the evaluation. What is the areas in terms of them growing in? Okay, so what's the next step for them? Okay, so then in terms of step 6, your development and training, identify skills gap or areas for growth. Okay, you want to align training with your organizational goals and employee career aspirations. Some of these examples could be formal courses or workshops, under job training, mentoring or coaching, or cross-functional projects. Okay, so those are various opportunities that could be available, again, depending on how that evaluation meeting went, where you've identified high performance or low performance, and you fill in the gaps where needed, or you push towards the next step in terms of the employees' succession planning or growth. Step 7, performance improvement plan. So this is used now when when you have notable um, sort of gaps in the person's performance. Okay, so you want to ensure that you are, addressing these um, gaps with the employee in a very formal process, and that's through a PIP. Okay, so again, this could be a very stressful time for the employee because they are in a position where they don't know what's the next steps. But again, you are there to support them. Okay, so you're collaboratively developing the plan with the employee. So you're not doing it on your own. You are with them and you're discussing the next steps. Okay, so in terms of what the plan will include, there's clear improvement goals. So it's outlined step by step. The employee knows exactly what's required of them during those goal phases. Okay, it's measurable performance targets, support resources, that's training tools or mentoring. So what sort of support or resources you're going to give them during this PIP. Okay, timelines for review and progress tracking. It has to have timelines. You need to you need to be able to track every point in terms of them reaching a goal. Okay, so when you get to the next meeting, and you'll find that performance improvement plan there'll be much more engagement or one-to-one sessions with you and the employee because now they're on a specific like performance improvement plan. So you need to go in and check whether they are meeting those goals or whether they are still underperforming. Okay. And you also discuss consequences of not meeting expectations. Okay, so what happens is when you have somebody that's on a performance improvement plan, it can go either way. It can go the way of them reaching the goals based on those targets that we've set out, and every time you're checking in, they are meeting those goals. Or it could be that at the end of that plan, they did not meet the goals, or they failed to meet the goals for each target that was set. Then we'd have to explore other options. In that sense, is at the beginning of the plan, you discuss what the potential outcomes is with the employee, okay? And the consequences of not meeting the expectations could be, for example, an incapacity due to poor work performance. But again, that's another structured process that would need to be followed. All of that will need to be communicated to the employee during the process of a performance improvement plan. Okay, so that has taken us through our slide on performance management. Are there any questions on any of the topics or the slides that I've gone through now? Is everyone still with me? Great, everyone's there. Okay, are there any questions though? Before we go through the formative assessment guide. Okay, let me share. Okay, there we go. Okay, so let's go through our formative activity for basic performance management. Okay, so the questions that that are in our formative assessment guide for this topic. Okay, so question 1, you need to be able to match the following objective with a correct description. Regular feedback and recognition provided during performance appraisals contribute to employee motivation and job satisfaction. Okay, so you need to choose which of the following objective matches that description. Question 2, during the middle phase of the appraisal, identify the aspects that's needed to be focused on. Question 3, state whether the following statement is true or false. The leniency bias is the opposite of the strictness bias. Question 4, feedback and discussion relate to the following statements. Choose the correct statement below. And that's 4 questions on this topic here. Any questions overall? No, everybody's good? Comfortable? Good. Okay. So that's the end of our session tonight. Okay. So again, just a reminder, a quick reminder, next week's session, that's on the 2nd of August. That session is solely for a Q&A based on the next topics, which is discipline and coaching. So reminder, you will have those recordings by Monday that will be uploaded onto the Moodle platform for you to go over those topics for the week. And then at the end of the week, we'll meet again to go over any questions that you may have. If you need any clarity on specific points in those topics, then we're going to go through that. And I will also go through your formative assessments for those topics. Again, quick reminder to everyone that your formative assessments are due on the 11th of August, if I remember correctly. Yes. Okay. Awesome, everybody. I know we've gone through, jeepers, almost 3 hours. And again, thank you for your patience and for joining the session. Um, and I look forward to chatting with everybody again in the next session. Okay. I want to wish you all a very lovely weekend. Please be safe and take care. The session has now been closed. Thank you. Good night, everybody.